Watch these three on three.
Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 386th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a different speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give our speaker up to an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, remind the interrupter to listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience here. Then we have remarks, rebuttals, they're not speeches, by the way, questions and answers. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everyone in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. Our speaker then gets the last word, gets a comment, close the meeting. That's how it works. Before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody has announcements? Now's the time. Any announcements? Any? None? I can't believe it. No announcements. Usually we have announcements anyway. No one has any special announcements. Our speaker next week is Don Kendrick, teacher at Brookhaven. He's going to talk on the importance of Head Start of Greater Dallas. Every child deserves a Head Start. It's on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. Following week, November 4th, the speaker is George Lujak. He's going to talk about will there be a global economic collapse, and that should be interesting. It's on your itinerary. November 11th, the Heist, how can corporations hijack America? That's Roland Rangel. He's going to talk about that. So it's on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. Anyway, it's all there. Our speaker tonight is going to talk about decline. His name is Jim Love. He's retired, having worked as an engineer and educator with publications in both fields, and having both a BS and MS in physics, to discuss in detail how the U.S.A. is in decline. He will argue that there is a long list of facts that support the argument for decline. Jim will cite the facts and provide explanation for how this all happened. He will conclude reminding us that the U.S.A. has many enemies, internal and external, and we the people can no longer remain divided while our enemies exploit the divisions. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Jim Love.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and I know that people have got lots of things to do and lots of choices, so I'm honored that you're here, whether you agree with me or not. Okay, a few preliminaries to get started. I do believe we're in decline. That's clear from Tom's announcement. This thing, it reads more like an indictment. It's a big list of things that I consider to be wrong and have been wrong for a long time. I like to think it's not fake news. You may not agree with me, okay? But that's okay. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. And I know you will. I'd like to introduce myself politically. I'm neither liberal nor conservative. I'm a political mongrel. I like to think of myself as a pragmatist, and I believe in what works. I also believe in what's true. There are some things I agree with Republicans on, and some things I don't, and vice versa as far as the Democrats are concerned. And there's two big things. These are probably the biggest things in world history that I'm not talking about tonight, and that's global warming, and you may not agree that it's ongoing, but I think it is, and nuclear disarmament. I don't talk about those because those are things that mankind in general are responsible for. What I'm talking about tonight are things that we've done to ourselves, by and large, which is like decline. Now, just to prove to you that I'm neither liberal nor conservative, some of you may think I'm liberal, I'm going to say something nice about the Koch brothers. All right? And the nice thing I want to say about the Koch brothers is that recently, I read this in the Wall Street Journal, that they made a large donation to a Catholic college. And the blurb that went with it was that the Koch brothers are getting behind I guess it's policy as far as this I forget what the name of the Catholic college is, but their policy is they think that moral education is at least as important, okay, as any other kind of education. And I can get behind that. And so if there is no, and I'm qualifying this, if there is no ulterior motive, okay, as far as the Koch brothers are concerned, good for you. Now, what I've just done is what I think we need to hear more of. I said something nice about somebody who's out there, okay? And this business of demonizing people because they don't agree with you on every particular is something I'm dead set against. All right, so that's the preliminaries as far as my talk is concerned. And now I'm going to get into decline and its causes. And here goes. Sometimes it's a good idea to take stock of how you got to where you're at and where you might be going should you continue in the same manner. Same with countries. Full disclosure, I do believe that the U.S.A. is in decline, and that if we continue to make the same mistakes, the next generation will pay dearly for them. In fact, everyone is already paying for them and have been paying for them for quite some time. All right. Now, this talk is thoroughly political. I make no apologies for that. And the reason is because politics is important. Political decisions determine how we live and sometimes even who's going to die. So even though you're sick and tired and fed up with the mess we're living in, bear with me, I am too, but a lot is at stake. All right. The first part of the talk covers where we are and how we got there. I start with what I believe to be facts. I don't think they're fake news, but you may disagree. Fine, we'll take that up later. Then I'm going to provide explanations of how I think we got there. No doubt you're not going to agree with some of my facts, but we can argue about that later. All right. The last part of the talk identifies what is most important and offers fixes. And here's a teaser. What's most important is unity, which we don't have. We're a very divided nation. And we need to put aside the partisan differences, and there's good reason for doing that. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. All right, here's my shopping list of facts. And whatever you hear that you don't like and you think is wrong, make a note and then we'll fight about it later. Elites, and especially the political class, are loathed and not trusted, especially in flyover country. The forgotten man and women are angry. Fact 2. Much of the media plays to fears and prejudice rather than reporting facts. Where is Walter Cronkite when we need him?
Yeah.
Third fact. Washington, D.C. is paralyzed and gets nothing important done, even when there's across-the-board single-party majorities. And even when they've had 7 years to figure out what a health care replacement should look like. Fact 4. ISIS emerged from the wreckage of a failed United States foreign policy in the Middle East and now continues its terrorist attacks in the West.
Fake news.
Apart from his base, the current American president is out of touch with everyone but his base and sometimes out of control. Objects of his scorn include the majority of our citizens, the intelligence community, European ally leaders, and even members of his own party. Dissent is usually equated to disloyalty. Nothing is ever his fault.
Propaganda.
Like I said, you're not going to agree with me on everything. America itself is divided and polarized, even though the majority in both parties are united in thinking that the U.S.A. is on the wrong track. There's some kind of unity for you. A significant fraction of the population receives or wants to receive entitlements that another significant fraction of the population thinks they have not earned and does not want to subsidize. America has plenty of enemies, including North Korea, China, Russia, and ISIS. The Russians did interfere with our elections, and even Fox and the Wall Street Journal now warn that the administration could fall if it is not forthcoming with full disclosure of its involvement. Racism is alive and well in the USA. White supremacist groups are no longer underground, and they feel free to march in places that they never, ever would have felt free to march in before. Now, even though this list is likely only partial, and even if you disagree with the factuality of certain items, I'm going to ask ourselves how and why all these things happen, and for clarity, I will take them one by one. Let's talk about the elites. This is easy. Over a decade or so, millions of jobs were eliminated, immigration was unrestrained, factories were closed, banks were deregulated, the global economy was brought to its knees, and then the banks were bailed out. Iraq was invaded and no WMDs were found, and then the Iraq occupation was botched while the war and occupation was financed with borrowed money. Thus, many with good reason decided that the system was rigged, Washington was not on their side, and also incompetent, so they pulled the lever for Trump, fighting back at the ballot box the only way they could. Bottom line here is that the rising tide had lifted only the odds. And with friends like these, I'm talking about the politicians who are in office prior to Trump, those who pull the lever for Trump figured, with friends like these, we don't need enemies. All right, let's take the media. Roger Ailes, Fox CEO, recently deceased, he figured out early on that facts are not what folks want to hear. So did Rush Limbaugh, or if you're on the right, so did MSNBC. Confirming listener and viewer bias and supporting the mutual admiration that is endemic within various echo chambers is the ticket to media success. Add to that never allowing alternative views or editing out inconvenient facts or even providing alternative facts works too. Advocate no compromise as well, because anyone who disagrees must be wrong or worse. This goes in both parties too. Rhinos were summarily driven out of the GOP, and today's Democratic Party struggles to construct a coherent message other than resist Trump, while there is considerable pandering when it comes to taking down Civil War monuments. Paralysis in Washington. This is complex, yet understandable. The media has played a large role in mind manipulation. Eschewing the mind for the gut, they've managed to toss out a lot of red meat, inflame passions, and elevate lying into an art form. Gerrymandered districts play a role too, because in many districts the primary matters a hell of a lot more than the general. Groupthink within the parties and pressures to conform in the name of loyalty has added to the problem. The internet's lack of a filter is likely now a major factor. We now live in a post-truth world because anyone can publish anything, reach millions, and not be held accountable for veracity or consequences. Everyone now includes Russian bots. As a result, no one knows what to believe anymore because so many sources cannot be trusted. Tribal loyalty now outweighs facts. And besides, what are the facts? Who knows? ISIS. This would-be nation-state is the direct result of screwing up the occupation of Iraq, which began with an invasion that found no WMDs. After that, we rammed democracy down Iraq's throat, installing a Shia majority that had more in common with Tehran than the deposed Sunni minority. Besides, it was payback time, so now powerless Sunnis fled west and then into Syria. At first, deals were made with them to oppose al-Qaeda, and U.S.A. paid them to do just that, but then we reneged, resulting in the Sunnis forming a self-protective organization, which we now know as ISIS. So they embarked on a revenge campaign, not only because of the betrayal, but because of all the so-called collateral damage. And everybody here, I'm sure, and just to prove again, I'm not neither right nor left, knows that the frequency of drone strikes was unprecedentedly high during whose administration?
Obama.
The Obama administration. Neither right nor left. Practical, down the middle. That's me. All right. You know the rest, including the refugee crisis that flooded Europe with fleeing Syrians. The bottom line is that the U.S.A. and its allies spent trillions, inflicted and suffered huge casualties that destabilized the Middle East and made things much worse globally. Trump's victory. It's legitimate but flawed. He and his team were smart enough to capitalize on the anger in flyover country about being left out and forgotten. On this, they are dead right. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania were the key, even though Hillary got the majority of popular votes. And that populist wave of anger was mirrored by the Brexit in the UK. During and subsequent to the election, Trump ran against the establishment, including the GOP. All right? After all, he is not a conservative. I don't know what he is, but he's not a conservative. Along the way, he has attacked anyone and everything that has opposed him, thereby making a lot of enemies that have isolated the administration from all but the lukewarm GOP leadership in his base. And you better believe that the lukewarm leadership is looking at the poll numbers for his base every single day. This put him out of touch and explains why loyalty over all else is his mantra. Impulsive tweeting, lying, mind changes suggest that he acts on gut feelings and is out of control, owing to desperation and fear as to where the Russian investigations are ultimately going to go. Russian involvement. There is general agreement that Russia was active in trying to interfere in our elections. The strategy seems to be, if you can't strengthen yourself, weaken your enemies by getting them fighting amongst themselves. They exploited divisions that already existed, that shouldn't have been there in the first place. There I go again, making sense. Now, there's plenty of smoke, and I'm leaving it up to the special investigator to report on the fire. And the smoke, of course, is that many in Trump's inner circle were in direct contact with Russians linked to the Kremlin, who met multiple times with questionable meeting agendas. And it is stunning and incredible, at least to me, that so many officials developed amnesia about meetings involving Russians. Who knew that amnesia was contagious? Enemies. We got plenty. There's North Korea, nuclear and their nuclear threats. There's Russia with ambitions of regaining lost glory by interfering in the Middle East and into our elections. There's China, who wants Taiwan back, and both military and economic control of the Pacific region, not to mention the hacking and illegal knockoffs or sweetheart trade deals. And there is ISIS, which regularly inspires its adherents to kill innocent people. Internally, we have both class and ideological divides, which I've explained, but no one seems interested in healing. Entitlements. Conservatives will tell you all about the welfare queens driving up to the Walmarts in a fancy car and buying T-bone steaks with food stamps. Liberals will talk about entitlements as a right, including health care, which conservatives roundly reject. Are some people gaming the system and getting benefits they should not be getting? Yes. Should conservatives who have decided that health care is not a right get their way and deny nationalized health care to a majority that does not agree? I mean, I have principles, right? But I certainly don't expect people, okay, to sign on to my principle because I think so. All right. Let's see. I submit the issue here is who gets to pay for someone else's benefit. And I submit that the problem has much to do with the squeeze on the middle class, occasioned by flat and falling wages, not to mention outright job loss. And when you're squeezed, you cannot afford to be generous. So it's easy for politicians to run against the so-called moochers and chiselers who want a handout. The problem is that all of those with their hands out are not moochers and chiselers. America's dividedness. Pretty much we are now two societies living within one country. One is rural, white, and conservative, politically and socially. The other is urban, mixed, and progressive, which is a new term for being liberal. Politicians on the right have stoked the fears that Democrats and moderate Republicans were and are buying minority votes with entitlements benefiting them and even aliens that they do not deserve. Recall Romney's gaffe on the 40% in connection with that statement. Gerrymandering and a Supreme Court majority, therefore, has now become a first line of defensive in the conservative mind against such ripoffs. White supremacists have stoked fears that foreigners and people of color are taking over, as evidenced by cities and coastal areas being rainbow in color. Do not scoff at this, as supremacist groups now number about 500 nationwide, and they didn't mind showing their faces and numbers in the march on Charlottesville. The fact that social conservatism is dominant in rural areas, especially the South, while urban areas are more welcoming to the diversity, whether sexual orientation, culture, or religion, further exacerbates the divide. So, xenophobia, which is fear of the alien, is endemic, and I can appreciate it firsthand, as on my recent vacation trip to Michigan, I got to gauge old friends' reactions to what has happened to Dearborn in just about 50 years. Dearborn, Michigan is a suburb just outside Detroit. It used to be a bedroom community for the Ford Motor Company workers. Now it looks like Baghdad. There's plenty of mosques, right? And because it looks like Baghdad, here's what some of my friends said. One said, "I don't recognize my own country anymore." And another complained, "Who let all these folks in who don't want to become Americans?" Okay? Enemies. While I love the U.S.A. and the ideas and ideals upon which it is founded, we in many cases have not practiced what we preach when it comes to foreign policy. Instead of supporting democracy, in many cases we have supported dictators because we become a security state, more interested in maintaining our security than promoting freedom and democracy. The rest of the world notices this, especially in Asia and the Middle East, and hates us for it. Russia and China are confident that their state-centric approaches to government are better, and they will prevail. We shall see. North Korea is a loose cannon for which there are no easy answers, as Kim Jong-un's survival is predicated on maintaining a nuclear capability, so that item is non-negotiable. ISIS will survive in underground cells even though its physical state is eradicated, and there's increased vigilance and control of the internet because being a martyr hero will remain more attractive, especially to young men, than selling out to the enemy and betraying your religion. To call the words of Osama bin Laden, "We in Islam love death as much as the West loves life." All right, so here's the conclusion. From where I sit, the sheer number of problems is alarming. If recitation of these has scared you, good. We shouldn't be scared. We should also be aware that history shows that most democracies fail for one of two reasons. One is that elites gain control of the political apparatus and talk themselves into believing that what's best for them is best for the country. That has happened here, as evidenced by both major political parties embracing unrestrained globalized free trade and immigration without regard to social consequences. It is worthy of note that populist uprising did not happen in capitalist Scandinavia or Germany, largely because they were more moderate in their approach to free trade. The other reason why democracies fail is that the government becomes paralyzed and can get nothing done. This happened to the Weimar Republic in Germany and also to the Menshevik attempts to form a parliamentary government in Russia in the wake of the 1917 revolution. And I'm here to say that it can happen here. Frustration with paralysis, sometimes manufactured by the opposition, led to populist support for installing a strongman dictator with tragic outcomes. It is undeniable that our legislative system is paralyzed and that voters are mightily frustrated, as evidenced by the recent election outcomes. So, I've defined the problem and its causes as seen by me, and I'm sure you'd be happy to correct me where I'm wrong. I don't like what I see, and the trend is not encouraging. This doesn't mean that I'm without hope. I mean, if you give up on hope, you give up on everything. But my mind tells me that things are not looking good, and my heart says we got to do something. As mentioned at the beginning, the answer is, here's the answer. You've got to restore faith in the system so that people have good reason to believe that at a minimum, the system is not rigged against them, or even better, that the government is on their side. As to how exactly to do this, we need to have multiple conversations that show some respect for facts and one another, and see the need for compromise, all the while keeping in mind that our enemies are watching. And they're enjoying the show. Finally, let us remind ourselves that the system is not the problem. Bad people who lack a moral compass is the problem. And fixing a broken government will require more than another investigation and energetic finger pointing. It requires a sense of honesty, and dare I say it, shame. Okay? And a rejection of the idolatry that that decides that self-interest should decide everything. No, Ayn Rand is dead wrong. Selfishness is not a virtue, okay? And those who worship at the altar of capitalism and think that markets should decide everything are dead wrong. Once that happens, and I'm not holding my breath against it happening, we can end the decline and thereby defeat the enemy that is already within our borders, which I prefer to think of as fat-headed thinking. Then we can get busy with the other enemies, which are external to our borders. And I'm going to end with saying that this idea of making war upon one another, okay, demonizing the opposition, okay, putting out fake news in order to win, okay, that's got to stop. If it doesn't stop, we definitely are doomed. So that's all I got. So you have to take it.
Inside there, is it turned on inside of the thing?
To the left, number 3 down.
3 here. Here. Is this it?
Yeah, it should be. Just a minute. Let me look at this flashlight.
I'm going to turn that down now.
You can whisper.
Oh. More.
Oh!
Hey, John, stay away from there.
Was the night before Christmas, and all through the house, the whole darn family was drunk as a louse.
There you go.
Question, Jim.
Yeah, sure.
How would you characterize the failures of the Democrat Party not to see the writing on the wall that Trump saw?
One critic explains it as if you think of the property party and you think of the right wing and the left wing, okay, the right wing turns out to be the Republicans, the left wing turns out to be the Democrats. My view is that what you need to do is look at who got rich, who got poor, what class was destroyed, okay? Were banks enabled, okay, to run wild and do what they want to do? Were they bailed out, okay, and forgiven, okay, for their transgressions? The banks and the ruling class in this country really turns out to be, in my view, corporations of rich people. And they to a large extent, they own both parties. Now, what the Democrats do is they have a different base, okay, but to the Republicans' alarm, what's happened is that that this base of populists have invaded and are now taking over, and that's why you got a civil war. They're trying to hijack the Republican Party. But you have another question?
Yep. Don't you think that really both parties are sort of moderately right wing? We really don't. We really don't have it.
Yeah. Well, there's no question about that. You have to take a look at whose taxes have been reduced steadily over the last 30 years. You have to look at the entitlements that have been taken away. You have to take a look at who got wealthy. You have to take a look at the wealth disparity. Okay? You have to take a look at all of those things. And this is not fake news. I mean, this is well documented of who got rich and who got poor and who got screwed. And the middle class definitely has taken it in the air. And both major parties, I think, who are representing a very narrow slice of people and interest, their attitude was, what are they going to do about it? Well, they found out. Now the Republican Party is being demolished. I think of Trump as a wrecking ball. And they're taking it apart, okay? And if it wasn't for the fact that so much damage that could be done to the nation because of what I consider to be inept leadership, I would be gleeful. I think that the Republicans richly deserve what's happening to them. Because, in my view, globalism is okay. Free trade is okay. Immigration is okay. But there is such a thing as going too far too fast. And that's exactly what they did. Okay? And they didn't care about the social consequences. And to me, this falls far outside the category of promoting the social welfare. Yes. Promoting the common good. Okay, the gentleman.
Who defines fake news, and what do you do about it?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I don't know what to do about it, to tell you honest to God truth. I do believe that we were better off 30, 40 years ago because you did have gatekeepers, and yeah, they suppressed things that they wanted to suppress. But at the same time, there was at least some structure and some rules and regulation for what got published and what didn't, right?
Right.
Now it's the Wild West on out there.
Right, and one of the problems I have with the news that we've had for the past 50 or 100 years is that the biggest story that in this country, I think, that we've all missed is the destruction of our Constitution. And I haven't seen one story in the major media about that. So, would that not be fake news?
Well, what you have to do is you have to reach a large enough audience, and you have to make your case, and you have to convince them, okay? The problem is that so many people's minds have been poisoned, okay, by all that's gone before, okay, that they don't know what to believe, okay, so what do? They look to an authority source that they trust. Some people tune into Fox, some people tune into MSNBC, you know, some people tune into, you know, you name it. And what other people do is they just tune out.
Well, maybe it's just an exercise in learning to think for yourself.
Well, yeah, but good luck with that. I mean, the fact that large numbers of people have given up on thinking for themselves and believe and authority figures may suggest that they're not capable of doing that.
Well, look where that got us.
Well, I mean, this is the classic argument against democracy, by the way. This is the sort of arguments that Lenin made. These are the sort of arguments, okay, that the Nazis made.
Well, free speech is the Wild West.
Yeah, well, it is, but I would say that free speech, you know, is not a license to lie up one side and down the other when you know for a fact that what you're saying is a lie.
And who defines what a lie is?
Well, this is a matter of investigation. All right? It's a matter of investigation.
Webster's.
I've been a teacher for 10 years. I worked at Home Depot for 25 years. So I had 2 jobs for the last 10 years.
Okay.
And prior to that, I was in construction. Basically, at Home Depot, there's just blacks and whites and women, and there's also all sorts of the bosses are black, all sorts of the bosses are women. You know, it's just this group of Mexicans, black, and whites. And at Home Depot, you know, in 25 years, there's been no problems in my experience. And then as a teacher, I'm a white guy in the midst of black faces. Everybody seems to get along. The women are getting along with the men, the women are bosses, men are bosses. Whites and blacks get along. There just doesn't, in my experience, everything's okay. And I sort of am a fly in the wall when I mix myself with whites because, you know, they're comfortable with me, and I don't find any whites speaking poorly of blacks. Everybody's just pretty much trying to get their kids fed. And so I'm continually told that there's this problem that in my experience, which is fairly broad, it's blue collar, white collar, academic, and I haven't experienced it. And yet I see the news telling me how there's all these big problems. And I'm not convinced, it just seems so separate from my own experience that I've come to doubt that these problems aren't being amplified. So do you see, I mean, in your life, are you seeing racism? I'm just not.
Well, my own personal experience is I haven't had any personal experience that's touched me as far as racism is concerned. I have noted, though, that the South entirely went over, okay, and became red states, literally almost overnight because of Nixon's Southern strategy. And the Southern strategy, okay, pretty much was predicated on the idea, okay, that we don't like Washington ramming, okay, integration down our throat. And there was absolutely no doubt, okay, that was the case. There's no doubt that that was the case because what Nixon did is he took notice of how well George Wallace did talking about the forgotten man and how well he did, okay, in the election that preceded that one. And so they launched the Southern strategy, which is blatantly racist, in my opinion. So, I mean, so if you're asking me, have I personally experienced it and seen it? No. But have I observed it from afar? You bet. Nixon Southern strategy.
I was talking to a wealthy black man the other day.
Okay.
And he's telling me how, I said, what's your experience? What's your experience? Do you feel that blacks are treated unfairly? And he goes, absolutely, absolutely. And I say, well, what's your experience? And he says, well, actually, I've only been stopped by a policeman once, and he was very helpful. So even he and this black guy couldn't come up with a real experience. The other day, my friend's son died. And the father, my friend, and he committed suicide. So it was a crime scene at that point. So
yeah.
We know the father's coming. He's 80 years old. This guy is crazy with grief. We've told the police this guy is going to try to get to his son's body. Please understand that. They assured us that they deal with this all the time. And not only did they not deal with it well, they roughed the guy up, the father, the 80-year-old man, who was just blind with me, and took him off to jail. This is And so that happened to a black man, then I'm sure I would have considered it racism. But it was white cops on a white guy. So how do even blacks know what is racist when some of it's just bad policemen?
That's my rebuttal.
Sure.
I like being controversial, of course, as you know.
Oh,
And you can look these things up if you want to think a little. It might be a little troubling. But when Hillary Clinton helps Russia get control of 30% of the United States uranium supply, and then Bill Clinton gets over $700,000 for making speeches in Russia, how can you not see this stuff about Russia hacking the DNC to help Trump? That's the fake news, don't you think?
Well, as you say, I'll have to research that. There's an awful lot to sort out. The fact that Trump declares that the real problem is Russian control of uranium simply means that Trump said that the real problem is the fact that he declares something to be true doesn't make it true. Okay, so I'll take your advice, though. I will research it and see if I can dig up some facts from trusted sources and see where I come out on it.
Yeah, that statement was not what I went on.
Actually, it's in the paper today, the very thing you're talking about, the back page of the front section A, and I hardly ever look at the paper. Guilty feeling. But I opened it up, looked at the back editorial. There was an article about this shameful thing about our government knowing all along that the Clintons were involved in this giving away our uranium.
This is about the racial thing. You know, you about
I'm just talking about my experience.
my experience. Okay, I was born to a police officer, a Dallas police officer. My grandfather was the night chief of police for the Waco. My mother was the daughter of a police officer. I'm the daughter of a police officer. I was told when I was growing up, Martha, if you're ever pulled over, put your hands on the steering wheel and shut your mouth.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I was told that. I work in hospitals. I work in a county hospital. I've always thought this, and I'm going to ask you: don't you think that the press, when it bleeds, it leads? Don't you think
There's no question about
don't
that.
you think that more things sell? Like paper sell? Don't you think time on night we don't have Letterman anymore. We have Colbert. We have all these people on late night, and they talk about the diversity and they drum it up and everything, and their ratings are up. And they talk about division. They make monologues about. I watch more Fox. I used to watch Morning Joe all the time. I lived in D.C. I watched lobbyism, but I sit here in diversity. I honestly have wiped more culturally diverse bottoms than anyone will ever in this room. And there's one other person in here, but I have worked in Houston and some port cities, so I may outwipe you. And you know, I'm proud, you know, and I'm honored to do that. But I think that it sells, and then also I see who has bought newspaper and also, and I see there is we don't have people like, don't you believe that we no longer have the ethics in newspapers and on Facebook? We don't have the ethics in journalism.
Let me answer you, okay? You need to see the movie Nightcrawler.
I've seen it.
All right. Now, Nightcrawler pretty much echoes what you just said. If it leads, it leads. I mean, the gorier, the better, because they're ratings driven. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about that. But that's why I yearn for the return of Walter Cronkite. I would like to see a face that I believed in. Now, the deal is that the media, you know, they like ratings, they like making money, they like advertisers, right? Now, here's something on the other side. I mean, so I supported what you said as far as it bleeds, it leads. Now, I'm going to say something that you're probably not going to like. Okay? At one time, there was a counterpart to Fox News. Fox News is, in my view, highly slanted to the right. Okay? Now, there was a counterpart. The counterpart was Air America. It was on radio. Okay? And the two people who led the charge on it, okay, was Rachel Maddow, okay, and the Al Franken. These were the guys.
He's excited.
Guess which one went out of business because of a lack of sponsorship? It wasn't Fox. You know, and Air America went out of business, okay, because they couldn't get enough advertisers because the advertisers did not like the stories that Franken and Maddow were doing. In other words, they were too anti-corporate. They were too anti-rich. And this is precisely what I was talking about in my talk. I mean, who the hell knows what to believe anymore when the news outlets have become propaganda outlets on the one hand, okay, and are going for sensationalism on the other hand because if it bleeds, it leads. So, and I'm glad to hear you saw the movie because that's at least one thing that you and I can agree on.
I would like to bring everyone's attention that this is the Q&A session here, and we really need to form questions and
Not comments.
and not comments. And then here I'm going to probably violate it with the next question.
But you are going to have a chance to comment.
I am,
But not in the question.
I am if I can get at the end of the line. Okay, we're going to. But okay, well, go back 25 years. What did the media tell you about David Koresh in Waco?
Told me a lot of things. My independent judgment was a high school dropout. In fact, he was a special ed student who went to Garland High School. Did you know that? Yeah,
I did.
And he made good. He made good by forming a religious cult where he was viewed as being infallible. And, you know, and he kept, this is my view, which is probably composed of bits and pieces, but he felt like whatever happened was foretold somehow or other in the Bible. Now, go ahead.
One of the things they did not tell you that never came out about what happened there is that 39 of the people who died there were black.
Yeah.
That was a hate crime.
Well, I suppose it can be viewed as such, but I haven't seen anyone who's brought suit to that effect yet.
I don't think anyone's had a voice to bring suit on that matter. Now, my question really is, how can you trust, how can you even speak of fake news when we can go and we can flip channels, and this has been the way for at least the last decade. We can hear the same script being read by the news announcers from one channel to the other.
You certainly cannot say that about CNBC and Fox. Can you?
Actually, on some news items, yes, it does.
Yeah. But I just thought that I'd bring attention to the fact that they have radically different agendas.
Okay, but you still, in the main, I'm talking about maybe local stations. Are you denying that that's the case?
Denying that what's the case?
that you can flip channels and hear the same script being read?
Oh yeah, there is no doubt that there are feeds. Okay, people on out there. It gets distributed, and unless you've got your people on the ground on out there doing independent observation and reporting, they're probably going to use the same story, right? But the real question in that goes to is that particular story, okay, that you're talking about, that's common, okay, to both of them. Can what's being reported be verified? If it can, then it's probably true. If it can't, then it's fake news.
To be controversial some more. Were you aware that Putin is a staunch fundamentalist Christian trying to promote Christianity in Russia?
Nope.
Look it up.
Nope.
Not.
Is everybody asked a question and wants to ask a question?
I'm not.
All right. And I thank you for your questions, and I'm going to take a seat, and now it's your turn to comment.
Okay, now it's your turn to talk, so who wants to be first? Come on up here. You got 5 minutes.
First of all, I generally like Donald Trump, and I want to like Donald Trump, and so I'm certainly biased in that direction. But I think in terms of the decline of America, I see this as of paramount importance or paramount cause. It's just sort of common sense as I've tried to figure this stuff out. Because basically what they're telling us is they're telling us that we send our dollars to China, and they keep the dollars, and they send us back flat screen TVs. And they just seem happy to do this year after year. The pile of dollars gets bigger and bigger. We take in more flat screen TVs. That makes no sense. I mean, and no one in this room would take pictures of George Washington for their real assets, but China has, or the world does, and that makes no sense. So those dollars don't come back, and they don't create jobs. So you have to ask, why does that happen? Since those dollars aren't coming back and they aren't creating jobs, why is this unusual thing happening? Well, my conclusion is because people, number one, people need the dollars to buy oil, and that's called the petrodollar. So those dollars stay outside the country buying oil, and if any of these countries decide not to take dollars, well, we go in and we kill them. And that would be Gaddafi. That would be the whole thing. I mean, that's Libya. That's Iraq. That's I think it was Iran back in 1954 when that guy started to take. So people need these dollars, plus they're a little afraid not to keep the system going because they've seen what happens. The other thing that happens, there's a tremendous amount of manipulation of the gold, the precious metals. So not only can you take these dollars and buy oil, but you can also take these dollars and buy gold. And because gold always has value internationally, so if you can get rid of your dollars by buying gold, that's great. So what we've ended up with is these dollars go out, and they never come back, and as a result, our manufacturing base has been decimated, which is the decimation of the economy and the middle class. So I think this whole petrodollar manipulation of the precious metals has been a means by which, and I tend to believe that there is an elite, have purposely weaken the United States. And why would they weaken the United States? I would say because a free and prosperous people are difficult to control.
Yes, great, thank you.
Well, I'm going to take a somewhat different tack on this, and I'm going to make generalizations which are likely going to offend everyone. But I have spoken before at this microphone at another location, but these microphones, about the symbol set of the staff and the circle, which represent the active mental and the passive mental. Carl Jung referred to this in terms of the process of individuation, the developing of the individual, versus mass-mindedness. Now, both Jung and Erich Fromm were dealing with the rise of Hitler, and I don't know when Jung died, but Fromm lived through the Holocaust and through Hitler's reign there. Erich Fromm, the psychologist, wrote a book called Escape from Freedom. And it was his contention that people in fear move to mass-mindedness. They look for a leader. They look for someone to follow. Someone who will tell them what to think. And another person who lived through those harrowing years of World War II was this man, Professor Stefan Heller. And I met him in 1988, and he lit my fire on a number of issues and got me interested in some esoteric matters. But his book here is called Freedom, Alchemy for a Voluntary Society. And what he outlines is how mass-mindedness undermines us as a society. And I do believe that that is really the challenge that Jim is talking about under different forms. Is roughly, nominally, and again you'll argue with me on this, but conservatives represent the party of the individual, and liberals represent a party of mass-mindedness, at least very favorable toward mass-mindedness. And I've never experienced anything outside of church where people sing from the same hymnal, like the liberals and Democrats do. And I've had people swear to me with zeal, study Noam Chomsky, listen to Noam Chomsky, like he's the great insight. He's the one. And I read Noam Chomsky, and I'm like, okay, this is. I guess it's kind of like the Rorschach test. You know, one guy can look at the Rorschach ink blots and he say, well, they're a bunch of bats. You know, these look like bats. And then the next person may see a bunch of things. But all I see with Chomsky is I see Marxism, basically. Marxism, collectivism, class warfare. And at this time, I believe the left defines almost everything in terms of class warfare. And they've taken the issue of race, which is a very meaningful issue, which this country's been dealing with literally from its founders. Jefferson was very much for the abolition of slavery. Many of the other founders were. They did not have the political clout at that time to do anything about it. But it was on their mind and in their writings. And so we've taken that, we've made this into a class warfare thing, and the only thing you get from that is you get basically a form of a civil war. How far it goes in this country, I don't know, but when you adopt Marxist ideology,
that's where it heads. It heads towards, at least from our society and what it was, it's a disintegrating, breaking down effect. And I see it pushed in the media. The media is complicit. They're very complicit in pushing the racism that we've experienced for the last 8 years. We had a president who came in, who many people of all racial description voted for because we wanted a change. And he had the chance to be a unifying force. We are at the end of his presidency, and here we have a country more divided than ever. And how did that happen?
Still.
Yeah, so I guess that's over my 5 minutes.
As usual, John, very interesting. As people know, I tend to look at things through the prism of socioeconomics. I think America's demise began in 1940, actually. I gave a talk when I talked about the sins of the economic sins of the Democrats, but I started in 1980. The full picture would have started in 1940. It was clear what game FDR and Morgenthau were playing. And they were playing for the big picture of economic imperialism after the Second World War. And so when King showed up in 1944 and said that he wanted a system of balanced trade by the IMF, they said, no, we've got our own deal, okay? Which was fixed currencies tied to the dollar. But unfortunately, economic imperialism means having a global empire. But it's an economic one. And it's waging wars against people who don't happen to agree with your idea of economic imperialism. And that costs a hell of a amount of money. As every empire has found out over the millennia. Rome found it out, Spain found it out, okay? Britain found it out, and now America's found it out. But they couldn't be told. You know, there's an immense amount of hubris here. But as early as the late 50s, America was losing gold. Because you just, as Spain, I mean, money during the 16th century, silver bullion was pouring into Spain. And yet Castile, which was the area surrounding Madrid, was going broke because they were funding wars in the Netherlands and here and there and everywhere, and they couldn't fund things. And that's what America's discovered. And of course, you know, if anybody stood up and talked the merest whiff about helping, you know, providing education and social benefits, they were in like a flash, okay, to promote wars and stuff like that. Okay, so there was, around the world there's been a trail of social wreckage left. Not one atom of government, of country building, actually. And so the fundamental problem is misunderstanding the role that you should have played with your position and wealth. You know, when you're promoting capitalism of the most egregious kind, people won't put up with it. They just won't. I mean, they do want good health care. They do want good education. They do want to prosper. They don't want their countries being taken over and exploited by a foreign power. And that's exactly what the US was up to. This whole deal in Iran was just that in spades. And look at the disaster it's been. Look at the notion of bringing democracy to North Africa, Tunisia, Libya, and so on. What a disaster that has been. I mean, these people are mindless. They don't know about history. They don't know about economics. And they believe that, you know, making the working people poorer is going to help the economy. Well, I mean, you know, it seems to be common sense that when people have less money to spend, that will shrink the economy. But they believe, oh no, it will make us all richer because we must reduce costs. And so they never listen to Keynes, okay? They don't listen to anybody else that knows an atom about economics. In fact, we had Keynesian economics up until the late 70s, and it seemed to work, which is government spending, stimulating the economy by government spending. But then, of course, Ayn Rand and the other nutcases, that Thatcher loved, and I mean, who knows about Reagan? I mean, he was half a nitwit, really. A cardboard figure spouting nonsense, but never mind. We had the neoliberal era. Now, what the economics of neoliberalism is really a recreation of how the economy was in the early 19th century, when the whole economies were totally different. So when you look at economics by Samuelson, and what you read is a pile of out-of-date garbage, total garbage. Okay, it just doesn't apply to the modern world. Because in those years you had the economics of scarcity. Okay, but today we have the economics of the great multinational corporations. Okay, you have the economies of scale. So you have an entirely different economics, and that's never. If you pick up a book, economics book from SMU. That's never brought out the difference. Why this neo-economics is rubbish. And so we've been living under this false rubbish now for 35 years, and it doesn't work. And so America is going broke by the second, $500 billion a year, trade deficit, obviously stupid, has been perpetrated by these neoliberal morons. And that's what they are. And candidly, Trump's got not a clue. He has no clue of doing anything positive. I think, to quote Soames, Winston Churchill's ranter, he's a total twerp, a malignant twerp. That's how we would describe Donald Trump. Now, so what can we do? I do not know. I mean, this means to say that America's got to sit back, look at itself in the mirror, and rethink. Do a total rethink. You're going to improve healthcare, education, housing, the main drivers of what we should be doing. And actually trying to lift everybody up. And this division that goes on, divide and conquer is a great thing. And there is class warfare in this country, no question. And there is bigotry, and there is racial hatred. If you've never seen it, I've seen it. I've seen it. And we have a lot of very good people that are trying to work hard, okay? But how could you work hard when a good wage is like $8 an hour? I mean, come on. I mean, and people can hardly survive on such wages. I mean, you would have thought, after, of all these decades and decades of progress, as Tom says, we should be working fewer hours, but most people are paid less and are working more hours. In fact, we work 2 jobs. And I see a case where a nurse, in fact, that's the 2 further adults, is working 2 jobs just to float the whole thing. I mean, it's unconscionable what's going on. And these people at the top do not give a damn about people. And when you idolize money more than people, that's the fundamental mistake. Because it's people in this world that count. They're the ones that create the wealth. Money does nothing by itself. Nothing. And yet these people amass it and idolize it, and think it can, and they believe because they have it, they can control everything. Well, these people shouldn't be, fine. You must have money, no question. But it must be put to proper purposes, not squandered. And my goodness, America just squandered trillions after trillions after trillions, getting into ridiculous wars like Vietnam, which ended in failure, and now, communism took over, and now we're trading with them. It's asinine. And going into the Middle East and creating a complete wreckage that Europe is paying for, by the way. So we have now bombs going off in London, killing, what, 50 odd people in Manchester, and run over on London Bridge, for example. Yeah. All because you had this ridiculous ideas of economic imperialism. It doesn't work, and it makes you go broke in the end. So, my feeling is, look, the only way to step back and have some people with some common sense here. Look at the facts, and these are the facts we're going to say. You know? And I think most people know there's something badly wrong, but no one's got the guts to stand up and say, look. But you must have a plan behind that. You can't just say, well, there's blah, blah, blah. What's your plan? I mean, you know, when you go into business, you know, you say to people, where's your business plan? Where's your cash flow? You know, how are you going to start, and you know, where's your income? Where's your outgoings? How are you going to survive the first few years where your cash flow is negative, for example? It's the same in any place. But you see people shoot at it. I mean, they think, oh, free market, free trade will solve everything. Well, I mean, there's no such thing as a free market. Free trade is a chimera. You know, and globalization is a disaster to most of Europe and America, apart from the Chinese who just love it now. It should be. They've been the huge beneficiaries of it. Anyway, I have nothing more to say.
So this is more of an announcement in the coming months to come for me. In December, I've signed up to talk about CEO payments, about how much CEOs make and how poor the performance is for what they do. So that'll be coming in December. And then my favorite subject is Big Pharma. I'll be talking about Big Pharma. And then also, something I do know something about, I know that I don't look like I know about military spending, but I had a boyfriend that was a retired Marine, and he was a military contractor. I want to talk about that. He made his living off of contracting, and why we should never have private military contracting ever again. We spent a lot of money on that. And those are the biggest thing we spent on, is military contracting, Big Pharma, and also CEOs. And that's what affected all of us in the middle class. Those are the three things that I'm going to be talking about in the coming months. I think that for somebody that thinks that when you put $1,000 in their checking account, you don't spend more than $850. But I can tell you what I am going to present is what we have spent and how much it's cost us all, and what our legacy is going to be to our grandchildren and the people, and why we need to vote and be informed. And when things come up, we need to call and tell others. And it needs to be like a pebble in the water and say, I do know something about this, and we need to not keep repeating these mistakes. Because we had 14 years of paying private military. We also, every one of us buys drugs of some kind in this room. And, some of us, or we know somebody that does and spends an awful lot of money that we should have negotiations. And we need to tell our senators that we need to have lobbying stop for Big Pharma. And there are people that put out solutions, and we need to tell our representatives that, you know, government should not be the best that money can buy. So that's my announcements, and those will be coming.
Well, let's see what we can disagree on. I don't think that the people who've been running this country have been stupid at all. I think they have been brilliantly evil. Yes. And there is one thing about heroin, sitting alone it does nothing. But boy, when you start taking it, you can't get enough until it kills you. The same is true with capitalism. I do not like the term anymore, capitalism, because we had in this country a nation formed around free enterprise, which meant everybody got a chance to do something. And no one person or company was going to try to dominate and put everybody else out of business, like the Walmarts and so forth. Some states won't even allow Walmart in. When we had governments that, like Clinton's and Bush's and so forth, that signed in legislation like NAFTA and GATT, look what they did. We had tariffs on imported, say, cars. Let's say Toyota wanted to send a car in here that was the equivalent of a Chevy such and such. Well, if it was priced at half the price, they would put a tariff on it so it sold equally. And that meant that we could continue to compete. It didn't try to put them out of business, but it meant they had to come up to par, and they ought to just go ahead and start paying their people more money. And when large corporations realize, well, if we can get rid of those tariffs, we can take our companies over there and build them for next to nothing and make all that much more profit. And that's what that's all about. It was evil in its inception. It had nothing to do with free trade as such. We had free trade pretty much before NAFTA and GATT. It worked. The corporations stayed here, the companies stayed here, the jobs stayed here, and we didn't take the jobs away from people over there. Now, to do it at this point, to go back to that, yeah, some of that business would come back, but it should come back. This country should not be going down the tubes economically. It has a constitutional structure that we have been very carefully moved away from over the years. That is the best thing that I have seen in, except maybe a benevolent dictatorship. And if you don't have a highly educated populace, that might be the only solution, because without a highly educated populace, you get what we've got today. The educational system is going to hell. Children today don't even know. You ask them about Waco, they say, what? What was that? You ask them about 9/11, well, I heard something about that. They just don't know history. And then much of the history that we are taught anyway is skewed by the people who want you to go in another direction. The history of World War II is a lot different from, I've mentioned this before, and I know you'll get mad at me, John. But Hitler, when he started out, did not want a war. He did want to get Germany back together from the lands of German people that were carved out in the Versailles Treaty after World War I and given to Poland and Yugoslavia. Those people were being treated like hell. And it was right that he made it clear that we will get them back, hopefully by negotiation. If not, we're going to bring our military in there just to get them back. And that's what he had to do, because they would not negotiate. And the evening of the day he was appointed Prime Minister, Churchill ordered the bombing of German cities, men, women, and children. Had nothing to do with the Sudetenlands and getting the... That started World War II, in my opinion. Without that, I think Neville Chamberlain's statement, I have brought peace in our time, would have lasted. And there would have been peace. Because I don't think, I may be wrong, but I don't think Hitler was out to conquer the world. Now, after the bombing of Germany and after he was badly injured in that attempted assassination, I think he lost his mind and became crazy and ended up the war being what we think he is today. But that's another story. That was well into the war. He needed to be stopped at that point. But the people who wanted that war got what they wanted anyway. The greatest profits in the world are from the war industry. Just think how Bell Helicopter went from nothing to fabulously wealthy because of all the helicopters that got shot down in Vietnam. And then when they were flying refugees into the aircraft carriers, they took bulldozers and pushed those helicopters over into the sea. I wonder why they did that. The biggest addictive substance on earth, in my opinion, is that combination of greed and lust for power. And we need to go back to a free enterprise system. We need to reinvigorate the antitrust laws and start breaking down the pharmaceutical industry, for one, the agricultural industry. We need to take these huge dominating countries and companies and break them apart like it was intended with the first use of that statute. IBM used to be very dominant, and they were filed on by the government, and they broke apart. They had to have another company to sell computer services while they sold computers. When it came to Microsoft, they got an antitrust suit filed against them, and then it got very quietly settled. And then all the Microsoft software had, at least to begin, maybe much more now, 7 back doors in that software so that the government can go into your computer whenever you're on the internet and look at everything you've got. That was the agreement there that is just so corrupt, so evil. Now, staff and circle stuff, there's a big thing in between that. You've got to have people who think for themselves, but they've also got to take that and say, okay, how can we work together for the good for the whole country? In other words, we need a Congress. We need people with strong opinions here and strong opinions there and viewpoints and so forth. But if any one side gets 100% of what they want, they're evil, in my opinion, because there's no compromise in that. And the nation was based upon compromise. Gaddafi, when he took over in Libya, took over as a dictator, a military dictator. He had to, because the 2 major tribes were killing each other all the time. They were constantly at war. And he put a stop to that, formed a Congress, and said, you will solve your problems by negotiation. Took the country from the poorest, most disheveled country in Africa and turned it into the wealthiest, most peaceful country in Africa. And he stepped back and just became an advisor to the council. And all our news media says he was such a bad SOB and this and that and the other. Even that Lockerbie stuff was blamed on him. It's been pretty well shown that other people were involved in that. And then the CIA paid Al-Qaeda and gave them arms. 250,000 of them to come in there and kill 650,000 Libyans and destroy that country. They were on a gold-backed dinar, which took the entire banking system and put it at threat's doorstep, because an asset-backed currency is not going to constantly inflate. You know, it was Jefferson who said, if we ever let a private bank take over the control of our money, through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will grow up around that bank, i.e. today, they will steal all the property from our descendants and leave them homeless in the land that we have founded. He knew about this private banking system. If there's any one thing we need to do in this country, it is absolutely eliminate the Federal Reserve. And we need to tell the Federal Reserve people, all of that international banking system, those debts are yours, baby, not ours. Exactly what they did in Iceland. Iceland is coming back to a prosperous economy now. The people said, I mentioned this before, they said in Iceland when it happened, hey, this is not our deal. You bankers did all of this. The 2008 collapse, I think it was. And so they took pots and pans and spoons and surrounded all their government buildings, and 24/7, thousands of them beat on these pans and drove those people out of their offices, held public elections again. The last I heard, they had 26 of those bankers in prison and a bunch of them out of the country. And their economy is coming back strong. And we need to do that too. We need to take control of it. But we need to get together as a people and stop harping on all these little bitty divisive things. Yes, there are important issues on both sides of abortion, but that is a minor issue compared to what's happening to us. And to think that these people are stupid the way they're running this country, go look at the Georgia Guidestones. All of these people are very occult, very secretly so, and they have to pre-announce everything they do. And the Georgia Guidestones, look them up in Wikipedia, list their principles, the first of which is maintain the earth, and one of their favorite words, at a sustainable population of under 500 million, since there's 7.5 billion. Let me see, that's about 7 billion murders they plan. Pharmaceutical industry is a big part of that. People are just dying of diseases they shouldn't have. I've mentioned this before, one executive retired from a pharmaceutical industry was being interviewed about 2 o'clock in the morning. Didn't even get to finish the interview before it was jerked off the air. But he stated that every pharmaceutical drug, now listen to this, those of you who take these damn things, Every pharmaceutical drug is designed only to control a disease, not to eliminate it, not to cure it. If they cure it, they're out of a source of money. And, he said, every pharmaceutical drug contains in it additional chemicals. So if you take that drug over a period of time, you will develop another disease for which they've got another chemical and another and another and another. Guess why older people are on 5, 10, maybe 15 drugs now? This is criminality that is not stupid, it's brilliant, it's just totally evil.
Thank you.
I'd like to talk about free speech. We hear a lot about fake news, and a lot of the sentiment is that we need to shut down the fake news. Well, free speech is unsettling and uncomfortable. Back in the 1800s, when the U.S. was spreading westward, there were a lot of newspapers that had presses, and they would argue with each other. They'd have editorials and articles and things like that, and you know, people would literally hate what their opponent was saying, to the point that they would go and burn down the opposing press, which tells me that there was some genuine disagreement going on. Now, I'm not advocating burning down the opposing press, but when you read some of the things, like I read part of some woman connected with the FTC in some way wrote a piece about how we need to control fake news because it's really getting a lot of bad ideas out there, and she wanted to impose laws to shut down what she termed fake news. See, the problem with fake news is somebody has to define it. And the left defines it one way, the right defines it another way, other people define it another way. So who do we let define fake news?
The winner.
Well, that's what happens. Okay, so what needs to happen is, you know, you let people say what they want to say. You know, Fox News says this, NBC says this, you know, Breitbart says that, whatever. And you read it and you determine who you want to listen to. And you give your money to the place that you agree with. And, you know, if ABC gets more people supporting them than anyone else, then they get to have a bigger voice. But to let the law define fake news, I think, is exceedingly dangerous and very Orwellian. So the news just needs to be, you know, somebody wants to be a news purveyor, let them be a news purveyor. If they get a lot of people agreeing with them and buying their stuff, that's fine. And I think evidence of what the American people agree with is evidenced by the fact that CNN has a very small audience, and other people, alternative news has a huge audience, because people get tired of being fed the same old BS, and they want, I mean, there was a lady that called in to Alex Jones the other day, and she said, I used to be a liberal Democrat, but I started looking up all of this information about the Las Vegas stuff because I couldn't believe what I was hearing about one shooter. And so she started looking up, finding videos from all kinds of different people about what was going on, and she says, I'm not a liberal Democrat anymore. Because she was researching things, okay? There's a lot of sources out there, and you go out and find the sources you want. If you agree with it, you support them. And if you don't, you don't. And let the market be what it is, and let people define what they think fake news is by their support, not from the government.
Right.
What's so funny here? No one's mentioned George Soros, and I see
Move those microphones near.
Oh, sorry. No one's mentioned George Soros. My gosh, he's one of the wealthiest people in the whole world, and I think on Facebook I have almost 5,000 friends, and I see all this stuff all the time. So I have to discern what's true and what isn't. But $18, what is it, John, $1 billion he has given various sources in this country to produce fake news.
Actually,
And to
produce
incite
a
people-
Civil war, basically.
A civil war. Can you imagine that much money? I mean, that's alarming. And so, yeah, be careful out there. I hate the thought of having to carry a gun, but my gosh, that really is something, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
John, we have-
Calvin, yeah, go ahead.
Everybody gets one turn before we get.
One till before we do a double, okay.
And actually, John, I'm back in line myself.
Okay, that's okay.
Well, I might have to be also. You guys are.
Look like we're gonna have to get some more time if everybody can do that.
Enough time.
Jim, I don't have any disagreement with what you said. I want to talk about, we said the First Amendment, it's not absolute. We have defamation. You can't really say things untrue about people if you have money because they can sue and get it. It's not absolute. And the only thing I've consumed that is absolute is you can think what you want to think as long as you don't articulate it too much.
Yeah.
Everything else has something limitation to it. And I think the media is controlled, as someone has inferred earlier, by people who buy the ads. And they have to say what they want to say. Otherwise, they will lose that revenue source. And this is what makes people greedy, and as someone said, evil, is they want to put out, you know, the Koch brothers spend a lot of money trying to influence what they want out in the world. And I think when people get too much money, they don't have nothing else to do, so they start doing that. So we need to be certain, like someone said, what CEOs earn. Corporations right now are not run on behalf of the stockholders, but on behalf of the people who run the CEOs and chief finance officers. And they make tons of money. And the problems we have with outsourcing and the loss of manufacturing is because those people bought our Congress and they passed laws that made it possible for them to do that. And we just continue to argue about these little peanut things that divide us, and they go ahead and do what they want to. I guess, you know, each day I get a little bit more news. Everybody know about 401ks? Well, the part of the new tax bill is to limit that to $2,400 a year, because they lose in revenue $115 billion a year, and that's the only retirement our children have. And just to give a big tax cut to the rich, if we give a material tax cut to everybody who works, it's a tremendous loss in revenue. And like others have said, Eisenhower warned us, but we didn't listen to him. Beware of the military-industrial complex. But we went on and created other complexes equally as bad. But that's one, if we're not having a war, they don't make money. And I know people who have had contracts with defense departments, and they have cost-plus contracts. And you know, they're not efficient, but it's not required. We don't focus a great deal on efficiency. Now, the gentleman said that he had never gone to do it. I have encountered racism. I'm 80 years old, so I go way back. And it's still here. There are people who work together and never have no problems in schools and on jobs and things like that. And but racism was created based on laws, and we had what we call de facto things in the North and the East, and de jure laws in the South. That was laws come up with the separate equal doctrines and all that kind of stuff. That's based on a group of people that of my complexion, and now we kind of spreaded it to, actually it was women, whatever race you were, they were not treated the same way, because except in some of the Western states, they couldn't vote just like African Americans could vote. And so is still here in some jobs. There are a lot of companies that don't have no problem with it. And I worked in 1955 in a supermarket in Beaumont during the summer. And the African American employees we were basically janitors, we called porters. We take people's groceries to the car and keep the store closed. The high school white fellows were stackers, they was restock. And we have some downtimes. And we were just sitting around talking about what our interests were. And the thing that blew my mind, our interests were the same. And we asked, why is all this mess going on? And they invited me to hang with them, you know, but my parents told me not to do that because I may be on. So I didn't do that. But, and that's when I really became real concerned about racism. It's in housing, we still have some problems. In education, we still have some problems. And in employment. Some time ago, I read a book, I forgot the name of the guy, but he was a terrific writer. And he wrote about education in America. And he said that the state universities were designed to train people to do a job, not to think, but to do a job. And that's for the, you know, for the Industrial Revolution and also mechanization and now digital and robotics. And the people that were going to think, they would go to the Ivy League schools. And if you look like, and everybody who was rich, their children weren't all smart. So we created Baylor, Texas Christian University, Rice, and those would be where I was, so those students would go there because they were to be the thinkers. And so you had to, you know, that's kind of a class system. You're going to have a group of people who are going to be the thinkers and the leaders, and the others are going to be workers. And that was a big problem, and we still, the residual of that is still in our education system. And the point you made about it, we don't have, in order to have an effective representative democracy, you got to have people who can think and they're educated. And if you don't have that, you're going to have what we have here. And that's what we need to work with. So racism is still here. I don't get bogged down. Just like the gentleman you said, every time policemen stop me, I was speeding. And they're always very professional, so I haven't had no problem with it. But I know some people have. You know, you can dress a certain way that don't look right, the policeman will get you. Well, I was taught to dress a way to avoid that. So it's still there, and when President Obama was elected president, it really came out, and I think the residual of that had something to do with the election of President Trump. I think there are answers. I'm kind of like Jim. I'm cautiously optimistic we're going to do it. I think President Trump may teach us all that we better start asking what's the best for all of us, and not just for my little group or my little tribe. And that may be why he's here. If that happens, then I will say he served a real purpose, because that's the big problem. We get beyond petty differences and demonization and force politicians to deal with issues. Issues and what impact they're going to have. Just like this bill for the tax cut bill is loaded with a bunch of stuff that's going to just perpetuate what we have right now. Thank you.
In the gospel, the disciples are coming to Jesus and they're asking him, why couldn't we drive this evil spirit out of this dude? And he said, that type is only exercised by prayer and fasting. We need to unite this country. We need to bring it together. But I don't think you're going to be able to do that without, if not prayer and fasting, at least some introspection and some study. And I ran across a really good book. I guess I'm in the book reviews tonight. This is a Jacob Needleman, Money and the Meaning of Life. And this really does address, it really probes the big questions. It really does. And money and the use, how money functions in our lives and how we allow people to interact with us regarding money is a huge issue. And I would maintain we can be dollar smart and penny stupid, and they get us every time. And so, in as far as economics is an issue to deal with, that really I think is a major part. And as I was referring to Dr. Stefan Heller's work on freedom, abandon class warfare, abandon mass-mindedness, and I think Ayn Rand could be resurrected in your pursuit of the individual. This is, I think, that's the holy work to be pursued.
Well, I thought I had to answer Albert a little bit. I happened to be on some of the receiving end in London of Hitler's kindness. As you know, Hitler practiced on Guernica in 1937. And 3 years later, he did the same to London, killing tens of thousands of mostly the poorest in the Docklands area. Now, let's talk about Hitler, okay? Now, as you know, the generation that fought in the First World War and saw all classes of people being eliminated. You know, for example, there was a play in London called Oh, What a Lovely War, which went like this. There was a big banner on the screen, and it said something like 20,000 deaths today, yards gained 5, or something like that. And this went on and on. It was a carnage. And so the people during power during the 30s had seen this, lived through it. And they wanted to avoid that at all costs. And so when we realized, Britain realized what Hitler wanted and was up to, that he was rearming. In fact, as you know, there were certain limitations on his rearmament program, which of course he ignored. But so most people, thinking people, realized that war was coming. But so Neville Chamberlain went to Hitler and basically said, look, you know, for goodness sake, we don't want war. And so he thought he'd done a deal with Hitler. Turned out he hadn't. The first thing Hitler did was to march into Alsace-Lorraine. That had been, in fact, Alsace-Lorraine was sort of half French and half German. But after the First World War, it became French. So the first step Hitler took was to go into Alsace-Lorraine completely unopposed. Next step, he marched into Austria, again completely unopposed. Next step, there were Germans in Czechoslovakia. He marched in the Sudeten people, and he was unopposed. But he went further than that. In fact, he took over the whole country. But the breaking point came when Hitler attacked Poland. There were no Germans in Poland. Okay? Now, there happened to be a pact. France and England had a pact with Poland. Immediately, September 1940, when Hitler marched in, that was it. It was realized now, look, we know what this guy wants. He wants actually Lebensraum, breathing space, extra land for Germany. And that was it. Now, you talked about bombing Germany. Well, in fact, in September 1939, when war was declared, there was like the phony peace for about 9 months or so. Nothing really happened. But then, and of course, there was the war in northern France. France was supposed to provide the army, which collapsed, and so the small British force evacuated from Dunkirk. At that point, Hitler was expecting England to say, "Oh, we surrendered too," and that's what he hoped. But in House of Commons, 10th of May, Lloyd George, Chamberlain was speaking and saying we must sacrifice all in the war. And so Lloyd George, who was a Welshman, jumped up and said, "You've talked about sacrifice. We request you sacrifice your oath of office and resign." And the whole House of Commons cheered. He resigned. Churchill came in. And of course, Churchill galvanized the nation because Churchill realized what Hitler really wanted. I mean, Hitler was the epitome of evil. And his Nazi party, his concentration camps, and the millions and millions of people who died in those camps are testimony to that. Now, what would have happened had Britain said, "Fine, okay, Hitler, we don't mind you sending your brown shirts over and ruling us, we'll put up with that." In fact, basically, that's what we've got somewhat today, in fact, in England. I won't go into that, but that's another. Anyway, Hitler's scientists had created these terror weapons, including the V1 and the V2. Now, had Britain not fought the Battle of Britain and absorbed resources and delayed his attack on Russia, he may well have captured Moscow. He may well have, because he delayed it 3 months or so, because he was planning an invasion, but he delayed it. And that delay meant that by the time he got inside of Moscow, the cold weather finished it. It froze up their tanks and so on and so forth, and gave the Russians time to counterattack. And they never recovered. Now, had Germany taken Russia, and they had the V2 weapons, America could never have stood it. Because there was no defense against an intercontinental missile coming in at 4,000 miles an hour, which of course we experienced in London to quite an extent. It was only the fact that D-Day had happened that we'd overrun the launch sites that we probably would have had to surrender. So it was a near-run thing, and it was a near-run thing for the whole of the Western world, I think. So my grandfather, my father, and myself suffered because of that war. Okay? I have a deep, I won't say hatred, but a certain great dislike of the Germans and the German people. They loved Hitler. They thought he was marvelous. True enough, he got the train running on time, but I mean, his bigotry and his sheer cataclysmic launching into this war, was a catastrophe. And certainly my country was wiped out economically by it, never really recovered, helped on by America, of course. So yes, I don't forgive Hitler for what he did and his cronies. They were personification of evil. And I'm surprised, Albert, that you could think he was in any way, had any redeeming features. I don't believe he had any. But he is a testament to how a demagogue can, because he was popular, just like Trump is popular. Okay? And these people can use popular opinion and have the most vile opinions, okay, and wipe out, nationalism and hatred against others. Of course, in Hitler's case, it was hatred against the Jewish people, gypsies and deformed people and all the rest of it. I mean, he was a vile person. And I think it, you know, I can't allow you to stand there and in any way praise what he did. I think it's, you know, entirely wrong. I'm sorry. As I say, my family and my country suffered a lot. But thank God there was Churchill to stand and say, no, there are some points we don't. Even though it's going to be blood, sweat and tears, and it was, you know, in the end, I think it was right to do. So there was no question of money. It was really a question of survival. And I don't think if the Nazis and the brown shirts had taken over, survival wouldn't have been worth having, based on what the philosophy and this evil creed they preached.
Jim.
We've got Albert, John, and Jim, and they're all talking about capitalism. And I think it's kind of a meaningless discussion in a certain sense, because they're talking about, because you can't talk about capitalism unless you talk about how the money is created. So if you have a free enterprise system and you have like, I don't know, in the 16th, 17th century, everything was gold, you know. There was a fixed money supply and things ran a certain way, and the rules of supply and demand behaved a certain way. But today we have a system where the Federal Reserve can give out tremendous amounts of money to one part of our society, and that changes everything. So I think if we're going to talk about capitalism, we have to define what capitalism we're talking about. Is that a capitalism with a fixed money supply, or is it a capitalism where some private bankers can arbitrarily distribute money to one section of our society and not another? Then we can have a meaningful discussion. That's it.
Dang, you know, when you're going to be 77 years old, I haven't caught you, Calvin. I can't.
You close me out.
Those hips get kind of stiff when you sit for a bit. I've talked about capitalism some. Let me repeat a few words I've said about it in a very simplistic model. Before we had capitalism, our economy, let's just talk about the U.S., was mostly agrarian, rural. We had cities and towns, and we had some highly educated people who, after we'd been in existence since, I guess, the Pilgrims landed in, what was it, 1621 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, until 1776, when we had the Declaration of Independence, we had some highly educated, bright